As public pressure mounts on the aviation industry over climate change, it's good to see that the business aviation sector is taking the front foot. We're seeing 12 business aircraft flying to Geneva from Farnborough in England using sustainable jet fuel. We're looking at that subject today and talking to some of the people involved in making it happen.
The use of corporate and private aircraft is in the spotlight, with some describing it as the devil's tool.
I don't believe it's the devil's tool. I mean, this is truly a business tool, and I think people have the wrong impression of it because of some of the photos they see of celebrities getting off, that type of thing. But in point of fact, when you look at the true use of business aviation, companies are using these jets to move their teams around. They're using the jets to move executives around. They're able to go and visit 3 or 4 places in a day or two's time and come back to home base. So it's truly a tool of the business. It's a tool. It's a time-making tool. It's about efficiency.
Business aviation was the first sector to sign up for emission reduction targets, but Europe's air traffic management head says more needs to be done.
We've got some significant issues facing European aviation. The key one for me is the CO2 emissions. And unless we take some significant regulatory action, and what I mean by that is supporting sustainable fuels, looking at a better reorganisation of the European air traffic network to make sure that we're flying optimal flight profiles and that we're using the airspace in an efficient way, we're not going to achieve our targets. It's as simple as that.
You're at the coalface on this one. You're dealing with it all the time. How confident are you that we will actually get there in the end? Do you think governments will change?
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we're doing 37,000 flights every day in the European network. And I believe that to get to our target, which is about 55,000 by 2030, we've got to do significant things. And governments have got to work with us. What they've got to do is provide us with political support to introduce sustainable aviation fuels, to change the network so that we can use it in an environmentally efficient way and look at the noise effect on communities. So there's a big ask for politicians here. They need to support aviation and support the environment, and they need to stop placing national interests ahead of the overall interests of the European network, because we're looking at the environment and 2030 achieving our targets.
The UK politicians were represented at the event by Grant Shapps MP, the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for general aviation, who is optimistic UK will back the plans.
So I think the country wants to move in that direction, and aviation's going to have to follow, and business aviation too. We know the technologies are coming about. Some fuels are available, certainly greener than exists today, and there's a lot more research to do. Government needs to be proactive about this, right? So in the same way as government, for example, put programs in place to, the artificial intelligence that will drive the cars of the future, electrification of cars, government also needs to take a really active interest in this. And that is what the all-party parliamentary group is doing. We want to see aviation and business aviation greened up, quieter, letting off less CO2. And actually, government's going to have to help to make that happen fast.
So what exactly are the sustainable alternative jet fuels that the industry is using to reduce emissions?
It's a jet fuel, but it's produced from a sustainable feedstock. So that could be a used cooking oil, it could be a plant oil, or several other forms of waste that we can upgrade, process through into jet fuel components. For the long term, we need to scale an awful lot more than we have today. There's already several thousand tons being produced per year at the moment. Over the long term, we're trying to get to a level around 30% of all aviation fuel by 2050, which is a huge scale up to get to that point. So I would say we do have supply. We're ready for the demand to come through now, and I think as more operators, as more companies become aware of the opportunity that there is with the sustainable aviation fuel, the opportunity to reduce the carbon footprint by up to 80%, then I think we'll really start to see that demand come through.
Now there is a huge financial charge on this one for the operators, and we're talking about maybe 3 times the cost of Jet A1. How sustainable is that for business, and what does an organisation like BP do in order to bring that price down?
Great question. Yeah, so the cost is higher, as you say. That's for a number of factors, but really it's because the feedstock is more expensive than crude oil, and the capacity that we have installed today to turn that into jet fuel is at smaller scale or less technologically developed than the existing oil refining industry. So I would say that as it stands, it's probably not sustainable. However, things will improve over time as that feedstock becomes more available. We find new sources, and as the technology improves and as the investment comes through to really scale up that production. And I think there's a place for companies like BP to play in that production space, to leverage our refineries that we already have, and to look at new businesses in that space as well.
Business aviation leaders are confident that private jet owners and operators will be prepared to pay more, but they need availability.
What we need to be able to achieve is that there is a bit more market pressure on the system, so I would expect and hope that operators would put a bit more pressure on fuel suppliers and fuel manufacturers to actually produce more of the fuel and have a more appropriate geographical spread. In addition to that, I'm convinced that the business aviation community and industry would be very willing to pay slightly more for the fuel than conventional fuel.
The manufacturers are even seeing advantages through using sustainable fuels, as the president of Bombardier Business Aircraft explains. The transition is simple.
In the theory and in practice, there's no difference. And that's the beauty about this, is from a safety perspective, from a performance perspective, it's the same as Jet A1, but with better emissions, reduce CO2 emissions as you fly it. And what we're seeing actually from a performance benefit, it actually performs better than Jet A1 and has better performance aspects with CO2 reductions while performing better with maybe better fuel economy.
The International Coalition of Operators, Manufacturers and Fuel Companies working together demonstrated that there is genuine belief in the role business aviation has to play in greening the skies.
If we can do what we said here today, increase the demand, increase the utilization, by definition, you will make it. The challenge we're going to have to do is make sure that the supply and then therefore the utilization of SAJF is adopted rapidly, because what we don't want to do is get so far behind that the adoption rate is slower than we want, then therefore impacting the end target. We want to be carbon neutral in 2020 with a reduction by 2050, so that's why we're so emphatic about starting now the awareness and then ultimately the adoption of this.